Okay, Desiree said, I don't know how to calm myself down to allow for his impulsive moment to pass and then de-escalate him.
Okay, I may ask you to read that again. One of our speakers actually was just talking about they have a take five rule, which was really cool. Um, but the one way to calm yourself down, this take five rule, what they did is they had five. So they would say to their child, okay, hey, I need to take five. And they would do it in front of their child so that they're modeling it for them. They're not telling their kid what to do, but they're modeling how they're regulating themselves. And they would say, okay, five, I'm going to count to 10. One, two, three. Okay, five, I'm going to see what is the third letter of the alphabet, A, B, C. Okay, five, I'm going to look for three blue things in the room. Okay. And they would sort of do more or less sensory things, but things that really engage this part of the brain. So essentially, when we are escalated and we need to de escalate, or when we're triggered, which is the same thing as being escalated, or when we're dysregulated, all of these words, and it's so cool that so many of the different experts that I've gotten to talk to, I'm sure you too, Laura, have different ways of saying the same thing. So, in a way, it's not rocket science, but we can sort of get pigeonholed by listening to one person or one experts say this is the way it is. Well, there are many ways to say your nervous system is dysregulated, you're in fight, flight, or freeze, you're escalated, you've been triggered, your buttons are being pushed. So, but essentially, what happens when we are feeling escalated or triggered is that our nervous system is sensing that we are not safe and we are being threatened. Even though we're not, it's not like there's a lion running at us. Um, the thing that feels unsafe in this case is the interaction with your child. And the question is great, how do you de-escalate yourself? And I love that you're asking that question, because I think that that's the right question to ask. Is putting it on, if there's fault, let it be mine, and putting it on oneself first and saying, okay, what do I need to do to de escalate? I've been triggered. So I think that for me, there are two ways to look at this. One is proactively and one is reactively. In terms of de escalating reactively, that would mean in the moment while it's going on, what can you do? And proactively would mean when it's not that moment and it's a different time, are there things that you can do? So let's look at reactively first. You're in the moment, I love this model. So on a scale of 1 to 10, from this being cool to this being hot. Hot is the angriest you've ever been, or saddest you've ever been. It's the most intense emotion you've ever felt in your life is the 10, and the 1 is calm and cool. You're totally relaxed, you're just enjoying yourself, you're just having an awesome relaxing day. And so on that scale, once we hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, that's sort of the midline, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Once we pass 6, once we're in 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, it's really hard to get back into that blue zone. It's so if we can catch it before, and that's kind of what you said, Laura, earlier, knowing what our triggers are and naming them, just naming them, can help us to de-escalate a little bit. But how can we get back into that blue zone once we've crossed that line? And then how far are we into the line? So one thing we can do is sort of in our own mind or out loud say, okay, I'm at like a 7 right now, or I'm at like a 10 right now, and just state it to ourselves or to our kid and say, and then putting it on ourselves. I feel really whatever. So just to name it. So to our child. And we don't want to be like, you're making me. You're making me is something that many of us have grown up with, and I certainly learned like that sort of victim mentality. I'm going to blame everybody else.
You're
You're making me
driving me
angry. You're making me
crazy.
mad. You're driving me crazy. But I'm feeling, and it's really good to identify it in the body. But you can say, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. I'm feeling really angry right now. I'm feeling tension in my muscles in my body. And literally, you can say this to your child, because when we say we feel angry or we feel frustrated, like that's sort of an umbrella term. But what's happening is that we're having physiological responses in our body. So when we say, oh, okay, I'm frustrated right now, what does that mean? Does that mean my stomach's tight? Does that mean my fists are clenched? Does that mean that I'm sweating? Does that mean that my hands are sweating? Does that mean that I'm rigid? Does that mean that I have an energy that I want to just run out of here? Like, what do we feel? So, to learn to, and it's not easy to get this vocabulary if you haven't had it. This is something that I've learned over years in my own life. So it's not just overnight, but to start to articulate, okay, I'm feeling really angry. My body is feeling warm. I'm feeling really tense right now, and I need to cool down. So just to articulate to your child, and then you can say, I'm going to take 5, or I'm going to take a minute, or I'm going to cool off for a second. So to articulate what's going on and then model what you're going to do is one way to do it. And then also, when we notice and articulate it, that, let's say you're at a 10, that's going to drop it down to, let's say, a 9 right there, or at least a little bit. And then it's really hard in the moment to think, though, because what happens is that the prefrontal cortex, the front part of our brain, the part of our brain that does the executive function, but also does decision making. And can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm doing. Do you know Dan Siegel's
oh, the
model?
brain one. Yeah, yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, this is like the emotional limbic part of the brain.
The amygdala. Yeah, or
It's also called like the red brain, where all the emotions are. This is your prefrontal cortex, where your executive functioning skills, your rational decision making, your problem solving. So when you get into that 7, 8, 9 zone, you flip your lid, you're dealing with the emotional part. So sorry
yeah.
to just as you were speaking, I was just thinking of this. This
No,
is a
that's
good
great.
reminder.
Think of it that way. Yeah, that's the one that's in charge. So that emotional brain, that amygdala, your fight, flight, or freeze response, your adrenaline, that's what's in charge at that time. And we need to get this back online and this back in charge. So how are we going to do that? So one of the best things to do is the breathing, is to say, I'm going to breathe 3 times or 5 times. It doesn't matter, but in belly breath, more than chest breath. The chest breath is very anxious. If you ever see someone who's always breathing like this, you can probably look at me right now and know if I'm breathing like that, it looks anxious. You know, but belly breathing, you want to breathe into the belly. Just 3 long, slow breaths, and it may be really hard when you're activated and in that kind of a mode to do that. But trust me, trying to do that is going to down regulate you a little bit. And
And I
then we're
just want to
so
mention too,
in this story. What's that?
I was going to mention about the breathing if you can make your exhale longer
Mm,
than your inhale,
thank you.
because if you think about it, when you're in a panic, you, right, that intake of air. But what do you do when you're relaxed? Like, a sigh of
Ah,
relief.
in fact,
So
that's
when you're doing your belly breathing, really try to push that exhale out longer.
I'm glad you said that because that's my favorite, easiest exercise ever is just do 3 ahs. So go because you're going to automatically have the longer exhale and so on and so forth. But even if you don't feel like saying but really to use this sort of technique to really breathe and down regulate yourself. And then we're so engaged in the narrative and the story. So now we start to, that means that the story is, I'm not safe, that I'm feeling threatened. And that's what a trigger is. We're feeling threatened. Our button's been pushed because something's not going how we think it's supposed to. So then it goes, then I think about the proactive. What can we do proactively? And what we can do is look at those 2 things. Look at the narratives in the story that we have in our mind, and look at the body and how we respond to that stuff, and do things proactively at another time. For example, practicing some meditations you can find on YouTube or in any number of books or what have you, and practicing the latest research says that 13 minutes is like the actual research based, and one of our speakers, Nicole Tutro, is talking about this, but one of the actual research based things that they found out about meditation that actually starts to change the brain. But you don't need to worry about that. Just do something proactively, even a minute of just some peace and quiet every day. And then noticing the body, but also noticing the narrative in the story when you're not in it, and maybe journaling or talking to someone about it and saying, what is my narrative and my story at that moment when I feel triggered? What is the story? And the story isn't the story. I always say the story isn't the story. And that's with your kids and with you and with me. The story isn't the story. So the story is they're not doing this and we need to get out the door, or we need to get moving on with dinner, or we have a million things to do. But that's not really the story. The story is behind that. They're not doing this. We're not going to be able to eat dinner. Um, we're going to be really stressed. We have a million other things to do, blah, blah, blah. It's like 17 little stories behind it. And usually it all ends with, at the very end of it, and sorry to sound dreary, but the amygdala does this, and we're gonna die, and that's it. So, and the reason I say this is I've done so much journaling and looking at like things that have triggered me, and work with so many kids that like when we really, I do a why exercise sometimes, but when we go back and back and back, it really comes back to that primal fear that we're really our well being is at risk. And when we can look at the story in a different way and say, okay, that's my story when I'm in that moment. What do I want my story to be? And when we're not triggered and we're in a regulated time, if we can journal or think or talk with someone and come to, what do I want my narrative to be at that time? Doesn't mean it's automatically going to pop in, but as we practice those things, it's going to come more and more quickly. It's about frequency and intensity. How frequently are we triggered and how intense is the triggering? And that frequency will become less and that triggering will become less. So then we have the whole, well, what about our kids and their triggers too? And the same type of thing. There's in the moment, what can we do to co regulate? Like if we say, calm down, like that isn't going to get someone calm. But if we're like, wow, I notice you look frustrated, I really want to take a breath myself because it looks really intense, really hard for you. Like if we're using vocabulary around, I notice, um, and so in the moment, how can we model and regulate with them, but then proactively when we're with them. And it's okay even if they're angsty teenagers and they hardly even talk to you right now. It's because I know a lot of parents go through times like that. But to say, hey, I need to talk. You're not in trouble. Let's sit down. Look, when these things happen, what's your narrative and story? What's going on in your head? What can I do? And to talk proactively about the narrative. And I notice when you get really frustrated, you get really grip. Your voice goes up. To help just talk about it. And it's the marathon. It's not the overnight fix. Anyhow, that's my response to that.
I want to go back to something that you said that I think was such a really important point. And you said in the moment, like that modeling where you're naming how you're feeling and then you're connecting to the body and how your body feels. That is such a huge thing that you can do for your kids. I'm in a course right now, self-regulation course with Dr. Stuart Shanker. And
I
he
love
said that
I love
I
Stuart
love him
Shanker.
too. Oh my goodness. I like every word he says. I've got tears in my eyes. I'm just so excited about what he's talking about. But he said that 50% of our kids right now, kids and teens, are stressed. And the reason why they're so stressed is because they don't know how to handle their emotions. They're either suppressing them, avoiding them, or trying to distract themselves. They don't know how to handle them. So the way they can learn how to handle their emotions is from their parents. So if you are able to label your emotions and say what it feels like for you, that's going to be role modeling and teaching them so that they can start recognizing what's going on in their own body. So that's such a hugely important thing to do for your kids.
Yeah. And for those of you that are like, what do you mean what's going on in your bodies still? Like, again, it took me years to really notice because even when I was and you were growing up, like it was pretty easy to check out. But now kids can be distracted 24/7. 24/7 there's static and noise and they cannot really have to feel things. We at least partially had to, got to, I should say. But yeah, there's really a lot of opportunity for them to not deal with it, to distract, but
I
we
have a
want them.
question from Alicia.
Yeah, let me pause this or stop this, and then